Okay, we are live. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On today's show, I have a very special guest. His full name is Judge Michael Randazzo. Last name is spelled Randazzo. He's just published a book, September 2025. Full title of it is Presiding Over Shadows, From Chaos to Order in the Court. And he is a judge, and it's a really interesting book. I got about halfway through it. Highly recommended. It just came out on Amazon in the US, so you can get a Kindle, audiobook, paperback, or hardcover. And there's a lot of information here that's pretty unique, pretty different trajectory as somebody who is still a lawyer, inactive, however, but it's kind of a unique. A lot of lawyers have kind of a unique backstory, getting all the way to the law and passing the bar and practicing. So his is definitely unique, which he's going to share. And anyway, welcome to the show, Judge Michael Randazzo.
Thank you so much first for having me. I can appreciate that you're a lawyer, but not in practice anymore. There are lots of lawyers.
There's a lot of lawyers.
Yeah, lots of lawyers and lots of lawyers that end up that way. I'm sorry. I had a momentary lapse there where I didn't have a feed coming in. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
And my path is absolutely unique to the bench, frankly, because I never should have been. I think against the odds, I even am alive today. But much more important, I've been able to thrive in not such great conditions, and certainly conditions that, if I had it my way, would have changed early in my life. A lot of struggles, lots of sort of personal torment, and frankly, a lot of things that I inherited, that I had no control over, that I had to overcome.
Right. It goes back kind of like it's definitely a story of an attorney, your book, but it's also a memoir about your family history, going kind of pretty far back in your family tree, right?
Absolutely, and I describe the book not necessarily as a book about me, but it's our book. It's a book about us. Just going back to why this book even began, or sort of how this project started. My grandpa, who was my hero, he died a couple years ago. He was a great storyteller. He knew how to just really weave together a perfect story, and you would always take something away from that. And those stories were going to get lost. And I did the very best I could to preserve some of the things that he told me, some of the things I knew myself. And I wanted to preserve those in some form. Started out as just a Word document on my computer. It was something I was going to leave to my children someday to say, hey, these are some things about our family that you don't know, or that you might not know. Because I know that they remember my grandpa in one way. He was just a larger than life guy that they just loved. But I also wanted to make sure that they knew that he wasn't perfect. And that really was the genesis of this book. I just kept writing things that I thought were important to our story, but more importantly, things that shaped my life, things that sort of shaped my trajectory, and also important lessons for them to learn, that you can overcome even sometimes the most dire circumstances.
Right. Would you be the same person that you are today without those challenges to overcome? Maybe is an important question. But you sat down, you were brought into the circuit court in Missouri in the beginning of 2021. Is that right?
That's right. Prior to that, I'd worked as a prosecuting attorney. I'd worked as a public defender at one point, and built a reputation up, sort of, I believe, a reputation for being ethical, and doing the jobs that I was elected to do. And the judge that was in my position before me, he was leaving the bench. It was an open spot, and so I threw my name in the ring. Worked really, really hard during that election cycle. I was a lawyer coming from the smallest county in our circuit, and so I had to not just be a politician, but I had to outwork everybody else that was working, maintain a law practice, and I was a prosecutor at that time, and maintain all of those cases that I still had, shuffling jury trials with election events, and just a lot of time was spent really reaching voters.
Gotcha. So you've been a judge for 4 years. This book started what, 10 years ago, you said?
really started in 2022. I had some stories written down before that, but the real start of this book was 2022 when I just started. My grandpa died. It was a little therapeutic to me. Um, just writing down some of the stories. They made me laugh at times. They made me cry at times. And eventually this became something more than just some file I wanted to just hand over to my kids. There were real lessons to be learned, I thought, in this book, or what was going to be a book. And I let some people read it, and they agreed. Frankly, sent it to the only publisher that I knew of, and got almost an immediate response from the CEO that said, "We're going to publish this."
Awesome.
So,
That's great. And you're kind of unusual. Like, I don't think you come from a family of academics. Is that right?
not at all. In fact, I was the first person in my family to even graduate high school.
Oh, wow.
No one had ever been to college. I had to do all that on my own. All of those things were going to be my projects or my things. My family had always done other things, usually breaking the law, if I'm being frank. But I knew that I wanted something different in my life. And to be honest, education was my savior.
That's great. So you got to, I think you grew up in Missouri too, where you currently work, right?
Yeah. So I grew up about 15 minutes from where I live right now. I've never lived anywhere further than that in my life. I commuted to undergrad in St. Louis, which was about an hour and a half north of where I live, and commuted to law school in St. Louis for a simple fact that I couldn't afford to live there. I had to live where I could live, where it was rent controlled. It was money that I knew I could at least make doing some side jobs or doing some things working for my grandfather, and made enough to get by. Struggled very mightily, but somehow graduated from undergrad and then went to law school. Struggled in law school. There are stories in the book about my struggles in law school. In fact, at one point, I had made a decision to drop out.
Oh, wow.
Somehow completed law school, salvaged some grades, finished in the top half of my law school class, and I passed the Missouri bar on the first try. I didn't get to take any law review courses or any of the kind of commercial available sort of assistant devices to pass the bar. I got
Was it
at least was
Barbary? I think it was
yeah,
Barbary back then, right?
Barbary. It was Barbary. That's exactly the one that almost everyone took. I didn't have the money to take it. I found somebody who had taken it previously. They let me borrow their books. I used those books. I studied as hard as I could, did my own review, and somehow passed the bar the first time.
Nice. Congrats. That's always a relief, right? When you get that relief that you actually passed. I remember that's a day that seared into my memory. It was a call in California. This is
Our
1998. Yeah.
Yeah, mine was I did get to check a website that had all of the bar grads, and I found my name. So I
Nice.
didn't really know what I was going to do after that, to be honest. I knew that I had a license now, and the only job offer I had was at the public defender's office locally, and so I accepted and began my law practice there.
And that's kind of like getting right into the trenches. That's the equivalent of putting out a shingle. Like you really get dipped right into the profession right away, right?
Absolutely. And I want to say something about public defenders, especially in Missouri that I deal with. Public defenders get a really bad rap. I will tell you, in Missouri, the public defender's office is the largest law firm by number of lawyers that exists in our state. It is also the best training that I've ever been through in my life. And I would say that those trial attorneys in the public defender's offices in Missouri, at least, are the best trial attorneys that exist in our state, and I will put them up against anyone, that we have, and anybody that practices in the state. And so I like to clear up any misconceptions that people might have, and there's not this great public appreciation for public defenders, and I appreciate the work that they do.
Yeah, they kind of get a bad rep. They shouldn't. And the one thing is that job is like you're getting hands-on training. You're being paid to train, like so many cases. I mean, especially in busy jurisdictions, it's just how many cases can you take, is my understanding. I never worked that job, but I heard a lot about it.
No, you're exactly right, and that's the other thing I'd like to say is that while they are the most competent as a whole group of attorneys that I've worked with, they're also very much overworked. And so many times they don't get to do the necessary things that need to happen on cases, and you're really kind of just putting out fires. What's the biggest fire that exists right now, and how do I put it out, and then move on to the next one? Um, in that way, I got to try, my first jury trial as a public defender right out of the gate. I think I tried the very first case I tried, graduated from law school in July, passed the bar in September. I found out I passed the bar, was hired on in November. And in November of that year, I was trying cases, jury
Wow.
trials.
Wow, that's amazing. How long were you with the public defender's office?
So I was at the public defender's office for about 9 months. During that time, I realized that which, so just as a beginning, I always wanted to be a defense attorney. That's all I ever thought I was going to be. I was going to go fight for the people that had been wronged, and you know protect their rights under the Constitution, and that's really the only plan I had. In practice, it didn't work so well, and so my life had changed a lot during that time. I had two young children at home, and I was representing a man through the public defender's office in a case where he had done some really bad things to a child. And I was just completely split. I was doing things professionally that, to be real honest, could have affected my own children's safety at home. Had people gotten away with things that I was defending them for, they could have been returned to the streets and had potentially access to even my own children. And my obligations as a father really took over, and I knew that I couldn't be a public defender any longer. And so now what do I do with my life? This is the only plan I had. I was lucky enough to get hired on as an assistant prosecuting attorney, and I began working as a prosecutor. And against what I really thought I wanted to be, I found my niche. That was where I wanted to be at that point, and that's where I think God kind of pulled me to. I got to help a lot of victims in those cases, and a lot of people through the worst times of their lives. And that experience was the most rewarding thing I've ever done in practice.
That's interesting. So you worked both sides of the criminal court system. Wow, that's probably your next book. That's probably like, I mean, that's seeing it from both sides too. Is probably something else. It must have been something else for you. I mean, if you go back into the kind of the earlier parts of your family, this was what were your parents thinking that you would become? Not a judge. Would they expect? What were their expectations of you?
Well, if they would have listened from the doctors from birth, so I was born about a month premature. I was in the NICU for about the first month of my life, and it was kind of touch and go with even whether I was going to survive. But there was a medical consensus that even if I did survive, that I was going to be severely disabled, that I would be behind my peers physically and mentally, and that I was going to have a really tough life. My mom, I think, just refused to believe that. That's the only thing that I can think of in my life that has been a consistent support from the day one. And she just, I think, refused to believe that I could not be something. She used to read to me, and she used to read to me often, and that's the only thing we really had when I was little. We were very dirt poor, and when I say dirt poor, I mean I was literally homeless when I was born. Both my parents were 16-year-old high school dropouts, and not much future. Neither one of them had a job. We didn't have a house, and they didn't know how we were going to survive. One thing my mom did know is that she needed to do everything she could to help me succeed, and she's never relented on that. And that's literally been her lifelong mission. I can't think, it comes from a spot of love, certainly, but I can't think that my life turns out the way it does without her.
Wow, that's great. And their parents, like you have some there's some criminal backgrounds in some of your descendants, right?
Yeah, and so before we start talking about those things, and I want to talk about those, but I want to make sure that I'm not glorifying the things that they've done, because the last thing I wanted to do with this book and this writing is to make it look like I condone their actions. I really feel like people did some horrible things in my family, and I feel like by talking about them and bringing them to the light and letting people know that these things existed, we can become better people in the long run. I think that there's some proclivity to violence that's always existed in my family. I feel like it was passed down to me. I talk in the book. pretty extensively about stuff that I've done, fights that I would get into frequently. I was all the time fighting as a teenager. Um, I always had this chip on my shoulder, and I thought that that's the way that you just had to handle yourself in disputes, and that was kind of bred into me. Certainly socialized that way. My dad was always getting into fights, even after I was an adult. My dad was still getting into fist fights in his 40s.
Wow.
My grandfather was sort of the same way. In fact, one of the stories I tell, which is a sort of a lighthearted story, and it kind of portrays him in the way that he was, not at all a humble man. But my grandfather, he fought a bear. He fought a grizzly bear, um, and that's one of those stories that I'm really proud of. But in a way, I was trying to show that he didn't even believe that there was a match for him in the animal kingdom, much less
Wow.
humans. And going back even a generation before that, so my great grandfather, Joe Randazzo, who by all accounts was a great family man later in his life, people just adored him, but he was part of the Italian mafia. Um, Him and my great uncle Mike, that's who I'm named after, is Michael Benigno. That was his brother-in-law, and they were mafiosos. One of the things that happened in our family, though, was that there were stories going around about what they did. So my great grandfather Joe, um, he was gone in prison for some time, and the family story has always been that he got caught stealing apples, and he went to prison for stealing apples. Now, you and I both know a little bit about the judicial system, and even before I went to law school, my undergrad was in criminology and criminal justice. So I started to really question some of these stories that had just been thrown about in my family. That was one that I questioned really heavily. Uh, didn't make sense. The punishment didn't fit the crime. And so I just started doing some digging, and I found some archives. I found some newspaper articles and some discussions about my great grandpa Joe. And well, he did steal some apples one time and got fined for it. That was a true story. But he was also a heroin mule for the St. Louis outfit, the St. Louis Mafia. And he was actually excommunicated at one point. It was the only time that I know of personally that someone was actually let out of the mafia without dying, because it was death was the only way out. And to them, he really died about as close to a physical death as he could. He was completely cut off from any communications. He couldn't discuss anything that had happened previously. Couldn't even have any contact with any family members that still remained in, and it really changed his life. Now, that happened before my grandfather actually had a chance to join. And my grandfather, even on his deathbed, told me that that's one of his regrets of his life is that he never got to be a real mobster. That's what he thought was the family business, and he thought that he was the heir apparent, or he should have been, invited in, and he never got a chance to. Now, I will say also that one of the things that he also discussed with me is that even though he really desired to do that, he wouldn't have changed it because he knows that that would have changed the way that I turned out. And so, amongst a lot of flaws that he's had, my grandpa was very proud of the way that I ended up. Great story I tell in the book. Probably the most proud that I can remember him ever being of me was the day we got my election results and I became a judge. And this was the first time that I think the Randazzos actually were going to stand on the other side of the law and really change the trajectory of our family. And I think he felt that moment in the same way that I did. And that was in and of itself was the change that my family needed. But I think he felt it, and I'm glad that he got to feel that before his death.
It's kind of a long arc for your family because you traced your ancestry back to Sicily, right? Where like kind of the
That's right.
epicenter of a lot of that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. And even I give a little bit of a history lesson about how sort of the La Cosa Nostra, the Italian Sicilian mafia started, and sort of how it was brought over to America. And it was a necessity. It was all about protecting us. And it was actually the La Cosa Nostra, the literal translation is our thing. So it was about us. It was how do we protect ourselves? And that attitude sort of spilled over into my family. We didn't talk about these things openly. All of the things that are discussed in this book are really sort of against the things that have been brought the morals that I've been brought up with. You don't talk about family. You don't talk about the things that happened. You don't tell outsiders things. Family secrets remain family secrets. I've seen in practice, especially as a prosecutor and a judge, and even as a defense attorney, I've seen in practice the horrible things that happen when you keep those secrets. And in a way, my belief is that if I get these things out there, it's in some way sort of washing this next generation of those sins. I want nothing more for my children than for them to be able to stand upon their own merit and they succeed or fail not based upon their last name, but based upon what they've done in their own lives. And that was really the out of everything else I hoped this book would be, that was my hope for it.
Yeah, that's great. One of the interesting things about La Costa Nostra is all that it's really almost comes out of medievalism. Like it's because there's no outside force to protect you. You had to be tied in. It's almost feels like it's ancestral, going back centuries. Like reading not just your book, but other books too. Like this tradition. But it's great that it's changed. So, but you also they were involved in a lot of different things like counterfeiting, heroin,
Yeah,
stealing
so
cars. Yeah.
yeah, lots of the stories are in the book, but absolutely all the things you just said, and even some worse things. Not just the Randazzo side of my family, who they're the Sicilian tied portion. The other grandparents that I have, other ancestors that I have, even my own father, they've done some really bad stuff too. My great grandfather, there's a story in the book about uh, what I thought he was his whole entire life, and at the end of his life, he was convicted for statutory sodomy on a child. Uh, didn't see that coming, to be frank. He was always a kind, gentle, nice man. And I think one of two things could have happened in his life. Either he was 79 years old when it happened, and either he was starting to have some mental decline, and he probably should have been institutionalized for that, or he was we call it usually a wolf in sheep's clothing, and those are the worst type of offenders. Someone that can be that on the outside, but also be something different when no one's looking. And uh, it was one of those two things. And, I tried to portray that as best as I can in the book. I know the prosecutor that prosecuted him. I found him to be an ethical and respectable guy. I don't think he made up a case against my grandfather or set him up in any way. I also, an irony that exists is that I'm the Division II Circuit Judge for the 42nd Judicial Circuit. And that very division, literally the judge that sat in my seat before me, is the one who sentenced him to prison. And so, the title is really fitting. Those are the shadows over which I preside.
Right. And some of the chaos and the violence too. Like it seems like you had a lot of kind of culturally traditional, maybe more violent than the standard family. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. It's the way we settle disputes. If somebody messed with you, you handled it with your fists. And then that's just what happened. And in fact, I got myself into trouble a couple different times in my life. One time in high school, serious trouble. Almost got kicked out of high school, got expelled for the whole year almost, and cost myself a chance of being the valedictorian for my class. Uh, may have cost myself some scholarships that I would have gotten otherwise. But I realized at some point that there was this pattern that existed in our family, and there's this proclivity to not just commit violence, but to not have the restraint, to not stop yourself from doing it. And I recognized that pattern, luckily soon enough, but I was headed down that same path.
Your dad, like he seemed to get, from a very early age, getting a lot of scraps, a lot of fighting. Yeah.
Always. And in fact, today, I will tell you just the honest opinion about him today. If somebody challenges him, there's going to be a fight. He's almost 60 years old, and I guarantee you, if he feels like he's wronged, he's going to try to fight, even at 60.
Wow. It's just that mentality. Yeah, I've seen it in other people too. It's really something else. What other kind of family dynamics do you think like influenced you to kind of go that right way, go the straight and narrow path?
Again, my mom was just this relentless force at times in my life that she would not accept me becoming what all of those previous generations have became. And to the point where we had arguments about things that I was doing, and she was always right. I was not mature enough to realize that she was giving me good advice, but the reality of the situation was she always wanted what was best for me. She shared some stories about her life at some points. And I share those in the book, and she's had a hard life too. I'm not trying to minimize, her struggles. In fact, I try to really put those on display. Share some stories with her permission about things that she went through, um, sexual assault, suicide attempts, and just overall a lack of guidance in her own life. And somehow, and I don't know where, I don't know how where it came from. I want to believe that it's somewhat divine. I mean, I think it's God inspired. She was in the right place at the right time in my life, and there's been multiple instances in my life that that's happened. People are brought into my life at certain times, and with no other reason to be there, or no other reason to do the things that they did, and they did those things, and it benefited me. And had it not been for those benefits, I certainly don't end up where I'm at today.
Right, and you kind of kept the family tradition about having children in your teens, right? That you were the offspring of teenage parents too, right?
I
Can
did.
you? Yeah.
So just going back, each generation, there's not a generation in my family that was not a teenage parent.
Wow.
My wife had a child very young, before I was with her, and so when I really got serious in a relationship with her, I really became a father at that point. I was 17 years old, and she had a son, and I was taking on really a stepson at that point, and that was part of the package. Um, Greatest decision I've ever made in my life, but was a tough decision to make as a 17-year-old who wasn't too sure what I wanted in life, but knew that I needed something to ground me. And I found the right woman at the right time. She's the right kind of tough and tender. She calls me out whenever I need it. And even with regard to the book, I was talking about the story with my grandpa and about how he was not humble, and about how I always felt that I was pretty humble about the things that I've done in my life. And then she had to remind me that, you did write a book about yourself, while she's singing or humming "You're So Vain" in the background. I mean, she has the ability to do that, and I love her for that.
It's interesting. My daughter's in college, and two of her roommates left and got married in their teens, and they were the offspring of teen, romance, parents who got married in their teens too. So it's still kind of happening today. It's pretty incredible.
Well,
And yeah, go ahead.
yeah, I think that's cyclical. I think that is something that it's either acceptable or it's not in a family. And when it is, you don't know any better, so you don't do any better. And that's kind of this moral of a young part of my life is I didn't know better, and so if I didn't know better, how could I do better? And then at some point, I did know better, and I had to start making choices. I know better now, but these are the things my family say acceptable. Do I believe it's acceptable? And I had to form my own opinions about those things. And luckily, for me, I started really independently thinking about life and about choices, and it's done me well in my career so far.
And you were both kind of boosted in your life by influential kind of like sports and teachers too, right?
Absolutely. I have one teacher that she stood by me no matter what. I would have dropped out of high school had it not been for her. Miss Pinkley, she's always kept me grounded as well, sort of like my wife. They have very similar personalities. She would call me out when I was out of line. One of the things that recently she even did is I delivered her a book. It was something that I felt was very appropriate for me to do. She's talked about in the book a little bit, and I brought her a book. I got to hand it to her, and it was sort of this surreal moment, and I was just so looking forward to this. She gets her hands on it, and she says, Mike, I'm proud of you, but I got to be honest. You're the kid that I had that I least thought was likely to write a book. You were a terrible writer. And, she was honest even then. She's given me a little feedback since she's read it, and I think that she's somewhat impressed, although I still don't know if she'll admit it to me. She always had my best interest in mind. She got me into college. She actually helped me get a full ride scholarship to where
Wow.
I wasn't out of pocket, um, which would have all been impediments to me doing anything in life. I didn't even know how to get into college, much less write an essay to try to get a scholarship. or what those scholarships might mean, or where to apply, or how to apply, or how to get the cost waived for those scholarship applications because I didn't have the money to pay for them. And she did all of those things at a time in my life where I needed the most help.
Getting out of college or graduate school debt free is a huge benefit, especially these days. So
Well,
kudos.
I didn't get out of law school debt free, but I did get through college debt free.
That's good. Kudos to Miss Pinkley or wherever you are, Miss Pinkley. Um, what's a personal question is what's it like running for a judgeship? You have to be elected into that position. Like, what was that campaign like? How did you get started? And can you
So,
tell the audience a little bit about that?
yeah, so I was a prosecuting attorney before that. I had ran in a couple elections that I had to run to become a prosecutor. Those elections were different. You could take positions on issues. You could say, this is the way I'm going to prosecute crimes. These are the type of things I'm going to do. But running a judicial election is just different because of the nature of what they do. You can't really take positions on issues because if you do, it's going to prohibit you from hearing those type of cases, or potentially could prohibit you from hearing those type of cases on the bench because your mind's already made up about those things.
Right.
And so there are some judicial ethics that we have to follow when we're running for judicial office. Missouri's weird because they say you should not be political whatsoever, but you have to declare a political party to run as a judge.
Hmm.
And it's really counterintuitive if you think about it, because you have to be affiliated with a party to really get your name on the ballot. And then after you do, you have to basically say, I promise to be fair and impartial. That's the party line that you have to follow, regardless of what party has endorsed you. You have to literally just be a robot with regard to how you're going to behave yourself on the bench. And that's kind of a struggle because voters want something to vote for. And when everyone's saying the same thing, they don't have a whole lot to go by. I kind of ran an election based upon the things that I'd accomplished at that point, and basically, the way that I prosecuted cases was a victim-centered approach. Victims had voices in those cases and voices in the courtroom, and I promised I was going to bring that approach to the bench. I think that separated me from the remainder of the candidates in my election, and ultimately that and knocking on a lot of doors. We knocked on over 10,000 doors during that election, and I say we. It was a very small group of people. It was my people, my brother Kevin, my wife, his wife, our kids. My mom helped, my dad helped, and my grandpa, who even in his just failing stage of his health, he figured out a way to help. And even when he wasn't helping, we'd get him into the truck and he'd drive around with us when we put up signs, and kind of just be there for guidance and to bark whatever orders he could from the truck. And so they were huge help. There's no way I could have accomplished what I accomplished without having them during the election. That election was really kind of a full circle moment for us too, because we were not necessarily too united as a family at that point. It gave us something to unite around and give us something to kind of come back together and really to start accepting everyone's flaws. All of us are flawed. Everyone in that group was flawed in some way. And despite all of those things, we were able to work together and accomplish something that I think was remarkable.
How many people voted in that election for the 42nd, is it Circuit Division?
So there's about 30 or 45,000 voters circuit wide. In the general election that year, I want to say that it was in the 30,000s, somewhere in that number actually ended up voting in the election. That was a big election as well, for some statewide offices, excuse me, and there was a great turnout especially for Missouri elections in rural counties. There was a great turnout in those counties, so lots of voters, lots of doors we had to knock on, most of them friendly, and most of them receptive. Got to also remember this was during 2020 and the pandemic was going on. And so we were being discouraged about even making personal contacts with people, much less knocking on people's doors. And so it was a real struggle to figure out how we could do this. We utilized technology a lot. I think that's sort of the wave of the future anyway. But we utilized technology in the election. I put out some campaign videos. I put out some radio stuff, and really made lots of Facebook posts and posted to Twitter at that time, and tried to just meet people where they were at.
Right, and so that's interesting. The how long is your term then as a circuit judge?
So circuit judges are 6-year terms in Missouri. It's the longest
Wow,
term out of any of the offices. I'm thankful for that. Coming back up on an election next year, so I get to do it all again.
good. Fingers crossed. Good luck. And also, you kind of found out that you have kind of a rare kind of modern tick-borne disease. Do you mind sharing about that?
I would love to share about it. It's in fact, it's impacted my life enough that it's a whole chapter of the book. Sort of some this divine timing that I feel like in that as well. But I have a disease that's called alpha gal disease or alpha gal syndrome. It's caused from a tick bite, and you become allergic to the carbohydrates in mammalian meat. And so it sounds very bizarre, very weird. In fact, I didn't believe it existed whenever I was told about it the first time. Sounds like a conspiracy theory to me, and it's a reason to get people to not eat red meat. Well, I was having some health issues in my life. In fact, I'd went into full blown anaphylaxis a couple times in front of my children, nonetheless, and that was one of the most devastating days of my life. I can't remove those memories from their brains. Although, if I could, I would absolutely do whatever I had to do it. But went really, really downhill with my health, and in a lot of ways, I started questioning my own sanity. I was told by a lot of doctors that it was something that was in my own mind, that it was caused from anxiety or different mental disorders, possibly, but that it was within my own mind, and I was the one causing the health issues that I was having. Um, for someone that earns their living with their brain, that sounds devastating, and it was to me. I always just felt like there was something else missing or something else going on. I got assigned to a case, and I served as a guardian ad litem. A guardian ad litem in cases is appointed to represent the best interests of the children, and I got appointed to represent some children in this case. Dad shows up. He tells me mom in this case is crazy, that she believes that her kid was bit by a tick or a bug, I think he said, and that he can't eat red meat now, and that she's got some mental disorder. And to be frank, I agreed with dad at first. Mom shows up. She's very well put together. Mom gives me information about this. I was very skeptical about it the entire time. And at the end of the conversation, she goes, "They're being treated by the doctor," and she gave the doctor's name. "And you can call him if you'd like to talk to him about this." And so I called him, started having a discussion, and he described it to me. He gave me really a really in depth understanding of the disease, and it sounded a whole lot like what was going on in my life. And so I asked him about that. I asked him about the symptoms that I have, and he said he invited me to come in for a visit. I went in, we did some testing, and I had the same disease this child did that was in my office. And so mom was not crazy. And I had to have a conversation with dad about the realities of the disease. And, um, the, that to me, there's no other way that I can describe that, but that's God's timing there. It God put me or maybe that family in the right place at the right time, and I think it saved my life, because there was 2 times I went into full blown anaphylaxis. I discuss it in the book, but I believe that I was pretty close to checking out.
Wow. So are you unable to eat red meat to this day? Is that it? That's the
Still,
only thing?
yeah,
That's it.
still to this day, I can't eat red meat. And it wouldn't. I would absolutely return to eating red meat today if I could. I don't want it to be like people to think that it's because I have some aversion to it or some reason, that I don't believe people should eat it, because that's not the case. In fact, I'm still a hunter. I'm a fisher, and I've lived on wild game most of my life.
Interesting.
Large portion of my childhood. Had it not been for wild game and for um, not filing the wildlife code, the wildlife violations, my family wouldn't have ate. We survived on, animals that were killed out of season and poached or whatever we could get our hands on to make sure that we were fed.
Do you think that you got the tick bite while you were hunting and fishing?
I would
That
say yes. The doctor asked me when I went there if I'd ever been bitten by a tick, like it was some unique circumstance, and I was honest and said, "Doc, I've probably been bit by a tick today, and if you want to look, you can probably find one on me at this point." And so I'm certain that it was something I was doing outdoorsy. I live in a very rural area surrounded by lots of forests, state parks, and trees. Have dogs that are come in and out of the house, and so there are ticks are all over. It's just that's a reality of life for us. There's no way for me to stay away from them, but in my specific area of Southeast Missouri, I think that we have the greatest concentration of alpha gal syndrome or alpha gal
Oh,
disease
wow.
of anywhere in the world at this point, as far as the concentration. And ticks continue to test for it, and continue to spread it here. So it's something that's
People are,
not going away.
yeah, they're acknowledging a lot of these tick-borne illnesses like Lyme disease and these other things that people get diagnosed as like you have mental problems or something, or you're making it up, or it's an offset of set of anxiety, or I don't know. But it is interesting. You are one of many stories I've heard recently, just chatting around. But Judge, we are at the 40-minute mark. Thanks for sharing your story and your book. Is there anything you'd like to add or anything I missed before we wrap it up?
Not really. I appreciate giving me the outlet and coming on and discussing my life. Really the bad stuff mainly about it, and about how really I should have never been where I'm at, and I still believe that there was something divine. There's some reason that God put me in the place that He did, and gave me the ability to even accomplish anything, because it looked pretty bleak from my birth throughout my childhood. But I also appreciate sort of your philosophy on things. At least my understanding of your philosophy on a lot of things is, um, we need to bring these bad acts to light, not glorifying them, not showing, but to learn from them. And when the things we do in the shadows, they always come to light. And I think being honest and transparent about those things can go a long way for us as humans, but especially for judges. I'm a judge. I'm a young judge actually in the judiciary, and while our system's not perfect, I think it's the greatest one that's ever been created. And I think we have some things that we do need to change. I'm young enough to not only affect those changes, but see the results of those changes, and that's really what I intend to do.
Amen. Thanks so much for writing the book. Again, the full title of the book is Presiding Over Shadows from Chaos to Order in the Court, just published September 2025. Get it now, Amazon. Like I said at the beginning, you can get a Kindle, audiobook, paperback, hardcover. There's a lot more in there. And again, the author is Judge Michael Randazzo, Randazzo. So, Michael, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
All right, stay there. Stay there. Let me just turn.